Welcome back to episode 3, the Jonathan Ishee series, Stories from the River. We're here having a conversation to understand the history of how Broad River got to where we are. Jonathan, welcome back.
Welcome to Stories from the River, a show in which we go behind the scenes at Broad River Retail.
So Jonathan, despite all of the first year struggles, you and Jackson survived the first year with Pineville. You know, the issues with the taxes not being paid, cash management issues, figuring out tagging, et cetera, et cetera. But you and Jackson made another pivotal decision to proceed with store number 2 in the University City area. How and when did that decision come about?
Well, it had been part of the plan. So we had this business plan, and we were gonna, we were gonna grow this company. I think we had decided that one store probably wasn't going to be enough in a lot of ways, and when you looked at, we were barely breaking even in that first store, but you realized how much overhead we could share. And ultimately we came to a realization that, you would have heard me say a million times after then, that kind of guided, I think, some of our growth thoughts into the future, was like, when we open this second store, it'll actually add to the stability of the first store. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of became our growth mantra. That's how we would look at growth, and through that filter. Well, what we've got is really important. Let's make sure anything we do doesn't risk what we have and adds to the strength of what we have. And I think that, philosophy served us well through the years and through some of the tough financial times that were to come. But back to university, that was our thought, is like, we've got to spread some of these costs out. Mm-hmm. We've got to grow. We don't have a choice.
Well, I love the reference to the plan. Obviously, I love that quote. We'll get into that quote. University City, I don't know how much sales you were doing from that area at that time. I know that seemed to be a good area to put a store. Probably there were other furniture stores there. That's usually a good sign. Mm-hmm. Do you recall an Ashley rep complaining to you about there being too much traffic up that way?
Yeah, I do. I remember. I won't call the guy's name, but I know who it was. And he said, I don't like that location. And everyone at Ashley had a lot of opinions at the time. And I said, okay, well, let me learn why. I want to understand why you don't. And he said, well, I was up there the other day and there are people everywhere. And I was like, okay. And there were too many people. It was like too many people. And, I just thought, well, we could go out in the field and open a store. It'd be really easy to get in and out of, but I'm not sure anyone would come. So yeah, it was hard before we had developed a sense of credibility with Ashley. Because we were young and green, and every decision we made was pretty highly scrutinized and criticized within the organization, because it was easy to do. And so, yeah, those conversations were so frustrating. But yeah.
And the university was an Afshin Ghazi development, correct?
Yeah.
And university opened in December 2004, mm-hmm. if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. Are there any funny stories from its opening?
Well, I don't know how funny it is. I would always try to go home, to Mississippi and see my parents and grandparents for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And, just didn't happen that year. I was grinding away, working pretty hard. And so I missed, it was just sad. I missed like Thanksgiving. I think I went to Bojangles and got their, Thanksgiving package, and then missed Christmas as well, trying to get ready to open. If I remember correctly, we opened the day after Christmas. Mm-hmm. But late, and I can't remember exactly when it was. If it was right before Thanksgiving, right before Christmas, we were getting, I think it was right before Thanksgiving. We were getting really close, and one of the last steps before we're going to start putting the furniture in was we had to paint the store. And I walk in the day before Thanksgiving, and the painter has misread the key. He's painted the entire store. Every wall, the ceiling, the bat, everything, this like beige, brown, like really boring color. And the whole store is just this sea of beige. And I was like, this is not what it's supposed to look like. Oh, yes, it is. And then like the look on his face when he realized he had mispainted the entire store, and that set us back a little while. That was a sinking feeling walking in. I was like, is this primer or is this? He's like, no, this is the color. So yeah.
Oh, that's not good.
Always
so you had to repaint. Okay. And then there was the growth. By the way, you talked about this plan. I'd love to see the original business plan that you and Jackson had?
I'm pretty sure Jackson still got a copy of it. I think he's referenced it a couple times. It's probably 3 pages long.
That'd be good. That'd be good
Yeah.
to put into the artifacts.
Yeah.
So the growth from 1 store to 2 stores required a mindset shift. And you've talked about this with me before. You were forced to come to grips with changing your mindset and ceding some control. Because with 1 store, you could control everything. You turned the key yourself a lot of times, opening and closing. What advice were you given about going from 1 store to 2 stores? I think this may have come from Jackson.
Yeah. Well, and it was in a moment. We had just opened the store. I was back in Pineville, working on some stuff, and I would kind of try to hit both stores every day kind of thing. And so drove up to university, and in between the time, I guess the day before and the afternoon when I got to university, they had moved a sofa from 1 slot to another slot. And again, like these are kind of, some of my regrets, but in the moment I really was frustrated. And, no one talked to me about moving them. Why did we move this? Who thinks this is good? It was here, all the jerk things that you say in that moment. And Jackson pulled me aside and said, hey, look, you're not going to be able to control every single thing. Like you're going to have to figure out, what to let go of and what to trust other people with. And that was, that was something that it's not like in that moment I figured that out, but I built on that hopefully and learned because to scale a business, it takes an incredible amount of trust, and you have to understand where your focus is and where you trust other people's focus to be. And it was just a really good, kind of crystallizing moment of, okay, we can't do it how we used to do it. And in fact, I will tell people now, sometimes someone will call and say, hey, I want to grow, build this business, I want to sit down and talk to you. And they, and I usually say, well, I can tell you what mistakes that I've made. I can give you that advice and maybe you can avoid those. But one of the things I almost always say if someone's going to grow any multi-unit business is it is harder to go from 1 to 2. The challenge from 1 to 2 is harder than 2 to 100. And just going from that, hey, I've got my hands on everything. We're making every decision. We can solve the problem in the moment, to, well, we need a process to solve these problems because we're not always going to be there on site. And so just that scale from 1 to 2 is a big deal, and probably where a lot of businesses run into trouble. We were able to navigate it, but it was tough.
I think it forces to not just work in the business, but on the business.
That's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah. And to systematize everything,
Yep.
people and process. It takes the right people who you can trust, and then they'll sometimes come up with the right processes.
Right.
And how did university perform with all that traffic, all those people after it opened?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the first year, second year, it beat Pineville. It's like an incredibly productive store for a long time, and yes, it was a good one.
Those were some strong years.
Yeah.
04 to 05, 06, 07.
Yeah.
And were you nervous before opening the doors for business that first day?
Well, yeah, I was nervous the first day there, and I was nervous the first day of every store that opened. Before I had a vivid, I don't know if you consider it a nightmare or vision or whatever, but before we opened every store, I just said, oh, I think this is going to be the one that we open and nobody comes in. Nobody's there. Nobody ever comes. And I had that fear and trepidation for every location we ever opened. And even in other businesses that I've, been involved in since Ashley, it doesn't go away. And I'm not sure it's all bad. I think that's a, probably natural reaction if you're being honest with yourself. But no, I was terrified that we'd open the doors for the first day for business and not a single person would come in. And so that it was always a big sigh of relief when that first person came.
Well, I think the decision to put it where you did, as opposed to in a field, probably quelled those fears somewhat.
Yeah.
Okay, now there was the decision to acquire store number 3 in Greenville, South Carolina, and so this happened shortly after store number 2, and you were quickly moving on a brand new market for the first time, and it wasn't going to be a new store. The store existed, and it would become the first acquisition. So, how did this acquisition come about? How was the deal negotiated? was it a good deal at that time? And would you have done anything differently?
Yeah. So we did kind of our hope and plan did start to bear fruit in that we were spreading out some of our costs, some of our advertising costs, delivery costs, corporate overhead, and we were finally kind of seeing some profitability and success with the 2 locations. And about that time, we were talking to the operator who was in Greenville, South Carolina, and he was having the same issue we were having, which was 1 location, and it's just tough to make money. And so we started working on that deal to acquire him. He was not very profitable, but we knew immediately, okay, let's not make the same mistake. So we were quickly working on the second location, which was in Spartanburg, in that market. And so we as quickly as we could try to follow on the Greenville acquisition with the Spartanburg market. But with that said, the negotiations were, we didn't know what we were doing. He didn't know what he was doing. I think, we've probably both made enough mistakes to equal each other out. And I don't know that I would do anything different, other than, there was a billboard in our parking lot, and
like right across the street.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the first thing you see when you pull in or pull out or in the store in the glass front. And he had another furniture store in the market, and he put like some derogatory marketing campaign for, I mean, it may still be there today. I don't know. It was there for a long time. And I would call the person who's selling the space and say like, all right, I'll pay double. Like, we got to get this sign off. And no, he's got locked up for like 10 years. So we never could get him off the sign. So if I could have gotten him off the billboard, that would have been one of the main things we would have done differently.
I think it was diverting Ashley customers to go get Ashley prices for less somewhere else down the street. Well, that'd be the one decision. But hey, we live, we learn, and I don't think that billboard's there anymore, but you'll be happy to know. So he built that store, but you and Jackson acquired the real estate, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And that was part of the deal that was really where the value was, because he wasn't operating the business, very profitably. And so we acquired the real estate. And then, over the next years, we're able to kind of put our creditworthiness behind the real estate, sold it, expanded the location a little bit, sold it, and leased that back.
Yeah, and did the same thing when you moved into Spartanburg, which I believe was a former Rhodes furniture store.
It was, yeah.
And bought that, leased it back, and I think that capital from the sale of those transactions would come in handy when the Great Recession would hit a couple of years later, to help us go through some lean times. Although I think you were criticized by some folks for selling the real estate, but we don't have to go into that. So around that same time, so I actually joined the day we opened store number 3.
Yeah, and I want to speak to that. I mean, Jackson and I said, Jackson, we've got to get some more horsepower in this company. Like we can't do all of this. We need somebody smarter than us. We need a hard worker, and Jackson trusted me enough. He didn't. I think maybe he'd met you in passing. And I just said, I've got the guy. We just have to talk him into it. And so we were. That was obviously a really good decision on our part. And you came in, and we can. We'll have to talk about some of the things you did when you came in. But just having another kind of trusted, really high powered engine in the business was essential at that time.
Well, I don't know about someone smarter than you and Jackson. We can debate that, but you guys, so I think we started talking shortly after you got the university store open. So around the beginning of 2005, if I recall correctly. I think I came to visit around mid-March of 2005, and we kind of cemented the deal. And for me to sell my previous company and use those proceeds, I guess, or borrow some money and to buy into the business and to be a part owner and managing partner. And I'm sure you guys were talking to different people or considering different people, but I guess having a horsepower because you thought you were going to get this third location. I felt pretty ill-equipped to go into retail at that time. I don't know that I would have been a natural selection to join you. I believe I asked you about that. You said, well, you know business and it's just widgets, which is a little bit more than just widgets. I think you undersold that one. It was something along those lines, but you had a lot more confidence than I had about being able to get up to speed. And we've joked about this, but do you recall one of my first questions that I had for you and Jackson, which was, what will I do all day?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. That was a funny one. But along those lines, I would always get the question, even as we got to be a fairly sizable company, well, what do you do? Like how do you run a furniture company? Like what is there to do? So I think that on the outside looking in, we find that really funny. Yeah. The question really funny. Maybe general population doesn't understand.
There usually problems and things to do.
Yeah.
Some of my very early memories were, I had come from I guess you could call it white collar work with programmers and doing B2B work versus B2C. And I do think B2C gives you more of that competitive like scorecard at the end of each day. But there's a formality to our correspondence with techies and there was a lack of formality. I think one of the things that it took me a while was I'd get emails without subject lines and I would do a passive aggressive like brackets, insert subject line here. And I had to get used to that. I think one time you said, I said, well, what should I do? You said, well, go inventory the store and the warehouse. I said, well, I don't know. What's an armoire? I mean, I need to know, how do I inventory a store warehouse? What am I looking for? I think one of the things I had to do early on was fire someone who wasn't showing up for work. She was pregnant at the time. I had to kind of figure that part out. So there was some things, but hey, she wasn't showing up for work. She deserved to have her role eliminated. And then I guess at some point I was trying to figure out how to add value. And so I said, well, I think our customer service manager had just left and we were doing customer service, I think behind the counter. I said, well, I'll go do that. I'll go take customer service. It was a way to, I think Jackson had the merchandising and you had the sales and finance and you guys had the real estate. And I was just trying to figure out, I don't think anyone really wanted to do customer service. No. So it was the way I could kind of figure out how to get into the business. I think you saved me from that after several months. I was lost and you're like, we actually didn't hire you to be a customer service manager. Yeah. Anyways, there were several tasks I think that you had given me and things of that nature. But once we opened Greenville, we really moved into a rapid growth phase of opening new stores. So there's the original Matthews and Matthews Plaza, which is now where Elevation Church is. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Spartanburg. So Matthews, I think, was store 4. Spartanburg, maybe store 5, and then maybe a little bit less than a year later, Anderson, and then Gastonia, which was another Afshin Ghazi development where we were still operating, then Kannapolis and Mooresville. So why did you refer, what do you recall about that, just that rapid boom, 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 one after another growth phase?
Well, I would go back to, we felt like we were able to use this kernel, this nugget of what we had, our distribution facility, our kind of centralized operations, and if we could tack on new revenues to that, they'd add to the stability of what we had and grow the business. And so those were that was the thought process there. I mean, in hindsight, and the way these work with how real estate deals come online and developments come online at different times and opportunities present themselves, it's not as scientific as you'd like it to be. Like, we're going to open 3 stores this year or 2 stores this year. You kind of have to take it when it comes. And so there would be periods of just a lot of work with multiple stores opening or being brand new, and those were busy times, but it paid off in the end. If you could have spread those out and been a little more methodical, I think that we would have executed at a higher level of quality. But it felt right at the time.
Well, I do remember that our credit worthiness was being established, but wasn't quite as established. And we got edged out. I mean, there's a lot of pressure in 05, 06, 07 to open up stores. The economy was raging and booming. And if you didn't, Ashley or someone else they were going to either find someone else or someone else was going to take the market. So there's this balance of grow to lock up the market or lose it permanently and have your sales cannibalized. And so, but you also have to find the right deal. And I think in Anderson and in Gastonia, those weren't our preferred locations at that time. And we paid a little bit more. And I think, I want to say H.H. Gregg got one of them, edged us out. And hey, they didn't survive or make it, but we got into those markets, and then we got into Kannapolis, which was debatable whether or not we needed to go there at that time or not. We went there, and it hurt University more than we wanted to, but then it turned out to be a really good store over time. It just took the market a while to mature. And then Mooresville was a development deal we did and worked out great. Mooresville, even though it opened around the Great Recession, but these were all adding stability to the company, and we learned as we went. But then I wanted to ask you, when you acquired the Greenville market, did you acquire his warehouse, or did you have to find and open a new warehouse or distribution center, I should say?
Yeah, initially we operated out of his warehouse, but we quickly realized that wasn't going to work, and so we went to a different facility.
Okay. Yeah. And at that time, we were still, and this will come back to the overall story, but we had 2 local distribution centers, one in Greenville, South Carolina.
Yep.
I think Whitehorse Road. We may have been in Duncan for a little period of time between Greenville and Spartanburg. We have moved warehouses quite a bit. And then one in Charlotte over from Westinghouse to Pro Lodges Park. But then we ended up in Matthews Plaza. We bought the center. You and Jackson and the New South team did a development deal in a former Kmart. And then we moved our corporate offices to Matthews.
Yeah.
I'm sure maybe you would have done some things differently with the design of the corporate offices, but it was what we could afford at that time.
Yeah.
And why did you affectionately refer to the Matthews corporate offices as the Petri dish?
The Petri dish. I mean, partially because we had no windows. We never got any sunlight. There was no air circulation. So it was just the pretty much ideal environment to grow bacteria or mold or germs or anything else. It was not a refreshing, wonderful, bright place to work. Although the people were great, and I have some great memories of that. But there would be days, in the dead of winter where you'd get there and the sun wasn't up yet, and you'd stay in the office all day, and maybe Celeste would run grab us some lunch, and we wouldn't leave, and you'd leave that night, and the sun was down, and you'd go a couple days without seeing the sunlight, and so it's just not a healthy environment. And I've got some scar tissue there. Every office that I've had since then, I've over-indexed on windows.
Well, windows and sunlight are hugely important. We didn't understand the importance of that then, and probably we should have. My fond memories of my first year are, I think I lived at your house for the first 3 months before I found a house, and we'd go on these long lunches. Sometimes we'd wait as long as possible. That would irk Jackson. But then we'd always get appetizers. This is before we understood about healthy eating, and quickly put on the furniture 15 or the freshman 15. But I remember playing hoops after work and having a lot of fun after that. But then Matthews is a long commute back and forth. And we understood the benefits of not having a long commute, which is when we relocated, closer to where we live. But there were some funny stories in Matthews. I mean, I think we always understood, we always knew what book you were reading or show you were watching. I think one time you were studying Bobby Knight, and this was the funny inventory story where, do you remember that one? It was Victor Medina, Janet, me and you trying to count inventory. And at that time we didn't hold a lot of inventory because we did cross docking, and we only had 4 doctors in Matthews anyway. So we couldn't really afford a whole lot of inventory. And we were trying to bring it in and get it right back out. And we were the 4 of us were struggling reconciling and counting inventory. And so there's a funny Jonathan Ishee story. I don't know if you want to share that one.
Well, I mean, that probably not my best moment, but we were moving inventory so much back then because we didn't really hold any for sale. So it was just always in motion. We didn't have as tight controls as we needed. And the only time you could do inventories were when there were no transactions happening. So you'd have to wait till the store closed, and usually on a Saturday night, because we didn't open until 1 o'clock on Sunday. And so you'd start as an all night thing. And I was reading or watching, I think I was maybe been watching the ESPN Season on the Brink about Bobby Knight when he just kind of loses it. And if you hit a button during the inventory, you basically negated all the work and had to start over. And so we're late in the night, and I'm starting to look at some of the printouts. It's obvious that someone has hit a button, and we've negated all of our work. And I think I asked, who did this? Janet, did you do this? No, I didn't. Victor? Oh yeah, but I just hit the one button, and I'm like, Victor, maybe I'd kicked a chair across the room. I don't know, but that was channeling Bobby Knight, not my finest moment, but I think it was so ridiculous that everybody just laughed at me.
We had fun with it, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but we kept it in, and I think there was some fear in their eyes, but I don't know if I told them, well, it's just this Bobby Knight show. There was the other time when we, I don't know if you remember the Chris Dulski story where we put a I think we put a Michigan Wolverine or something in his office to.
No, he put the Buckeye blow up in my office.
Yeah.
And so then I changed the handbook to make a blue Michigan t-shirt acceptable
For all
uniform
the people,
for the warehouse staff. And then I bought everybody a blue Michigan t-shirt. So I talked to him a couple years ago, and he said 10 years later, they would still come in with this Michigan t-shirt on just to irk him to death.
Well, we had the Michigan fight song, and then you ripped off your button shirt and showed the Michigan t-shirt. We all wore Michigan Wolverine t-shirts. I guess now would be an appropriate time. And Chris, if you're watching this, Chris did not put the Buckeye in your office. I did, and I pawned it off on Chris. Because I think you were having some buddies from back home, and when he walked into your office, he walked into the Buckeye. It's when ESPN was doing these prankster commercials, and so I had the idea because I saw the Buckeye and I borrowed it. I think because I had it at my house, and I was like, I think I know how I can put this to use. So I'm gonna blame it on Chris, and Chris to this day he never ratted me out. So sorry about that.
Well, I think deep down I knew that, but it's redundant to make fun of an Ole Miss fan. So
there we go. Somehow we coexisted, a Mississippi State fan and an Ole Miss fan.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Stories from the River. To check out more episodes, visit storiesfromtheriver.com. Join us again next week, and remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.